Shields up, Ironbreakers. Today we're going to be taking a look at Crimson Desert, and this is a title that has actually had quite a bit of an interesting story since it's been announced back in 2019. This is a title that is being developed by Pearl Abyss, who are the same developers behind Black Desert Online, and Black Desert Online is an interesting MMORPG that has a fantastic combat system, but usually I end up not really dedicating too much time to it because it is extremely grindy, as a lot of MMORPGs tend to be. But Black Desert really has a lot of progression walls that you end up hitting and stuff like that. So, it's not a game that I tend to dedicate a whole lot of time into. Now, when Crimson Desert was initially announced all the way back in 2019, initially it didn't really strike my fancy because I was just thinking, oh, they're just doing the next version of Black Desert Online. There was supposed to still be some kind of a multiplayer component to the game back then, I believe. And I was like, I'm not sure how this is going to turn out. But since then, the developers have kind of went into just full-on development mode. They didn't really release a whole lot of news. And then eventually in I think 2021 or something like that, we got some new trailers here and there. But it always seems like the developers come out, they put out a little bit of a trailer, they take in some feedback, and then they disappear into the void, and we almost forget that this game even exists. Which, I kind of feel like I did a reaction to some gameplay a long time ago of this title. And since then, it's oh, I have no idea what's going on. However, right ahead of Gamescom, they actually released a brand new gameplay trailer for their boss fight, Whitehorn. And I did a reaction to that on the channel, and I was like, oh, this is actually looking way more interesting, and it looks like they're focusing more on the single-player aspects of the game, which seems pretty cool. The character can do these crazy wrestling moves, and I was like, I don't know, man, this looks pretty interesting. So I ended up booking a session in Gamescom to actually go and check out the game for myself. And that is when things got very, very interesting. So since then, I've came back, I looked at their website to kind of see where they're at with the game, what is the game actually being described as, because what I've played was very much a vertical slice of gameplay that showcases a couple of the boss fights, a little bit of voice acting, some cutscenes and stuff like that, just to give you an idea. But it is very much a small slice of what you can expect, because this game is being presented as an open world action-adventure game. And from looking at the trailer from 2023, it actually looks extremely impressive, just the scale of things that they expect you to do. There's going to be tons of side quests from the look of it. There's going to be this thing about you recruiting companions, and you're going to be forming your own band of mercenaries to take on missions and do all of these crazy things. And apparently there's also going to be choices that you're going to be able to make. And just looking at the scale of the world that is presented in the trailer of 2023, I want you guys to keep that in mind. This is not what I played at Gamescom. This is what's presented on their trailer of 2023. One of the things that I would equate this to is almost like Witcher 3 meets Game of Thrones, but your character also happens to have a really in-depth combat system, way more in depth than Witcher 3. If you guys remember, I've always said I love Witcher 3, I think it's an amazing game, but personally I just can't get into the combat of Witcher 3 that much, and that's just maybe a me thing, because I know that there's a lot of people that love it. But the combat system in this game is way more in depth. There's this super cool combo system of stuff that you can do because, for instance, your character uses a sword and shield, but at the same time, you're also going to be able to just straight up punch enemies, kick enemies, which makes sense if you think about it, because just because you're using a sword and a shield doesn't mean that all your attacks need to be a sword swipe or a shield strike. You can straight up run up to enemies and use them to jump off of them and then do plunging attacks, even though, I'll be honest, I did not have a full mastery of the combat system. You have a very small time to actually kind of learn how to do stuff. And there were all of these crazy special attacks. I feel like I didn't even use half of the moves that were available to me in the 1 hour of gameplay that I had. And I also stubbornly went on against one of the harder bosses, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. But it's been a game that actually surprised me a lot, way more than I initially expected. Now, I should say that I don't think that visually speaking the game is super impressive. I think it looks really good, but I think that it was also being given all kinds of favors from the quality of the monitor that I was playing on in the show floor, because whenever I come back home and I actually look at the B-roll footage that they sent me, because I wasn't really allowed to capture footage on the show floor, but they did let me film it. So I do have like, just a film of me playing the game just so that I can kind of like reference and remember all of the things that I did in the game. And I can actually just show that on here, but I don't think there's that much of an advantage because the B-roll just looks way better. And it's not like the game had any performance issues on the show floor. The game was running pretty smoothly 60 from what I could tell. I didn't really see a whole lot of frame rate dips or anything like that. So yeah, in terms of visuals, I think the game looks really good. In terms of animations, I think the game is excellent. I do feel that the combat is a little bit floatier than I would like, but it is not as floaty as it seems in the gameplay footage, if that makes sense. Because I remember when I first watched the White Horn scene, which was the first gameplay that they released ahead of Gamescom, I was like, this combat feels a little bit too floaty just from looking at it. When you're actually playing it, it doesn't feel that floaty, but it does have a little bit of float to it. It's kind of really hard to explain unless you actually get to play it, so I understand that some players are going to be hesitant, but it feels really good once you get your hands on it. That's what I'm trying to say. The combat feels good. The weight of the moves that you are doing against the enemies, they feel really good. In the first couple of the first bit of gameplay that I got to experience, it also has some cutscenes that integrate seamlessly into the gameplay. Those were done really well. And one of the things that really surprised me was just the quality of the voice acting. Like, this game has really good voice acting. I did not expect to see that in, the little gameplay snippet that I did. And the animations on those cutscenes are also top-notch. The one complaint that I have in terms of visuals is that I feel like they fall into that category that a lot of developers sometimes, they just see, oh man, look at all these particle effects that I can do, and it's just particle effects all over the screen. In a lot of ways, I wish they would actually tone that down a little bit, because I feel like you don't need all of these particle effects to showcase the awesomeness that is the combat. As a matter of fact, I would argue that sometimes it actually takes away from it. So if there's one bit of feedback that I would give from a visual standpoint from my experience on the show floor, is like, I wish there weren't as many particle effects, particularly because I went and I fought this boss called the Stag Lord. And the Stag Lord's arena, it's snowing while you're there. So you have the particle effects of your special attacks, the particle effects of the boss's special attacks, and the particle effects of snow all over the place, which is also appears to me, if I remember correctly, it reacts dynamically to your character's movement and to the boss's movement, which is really cool, but you just end up with a lot of clutter on screen. At least in my opinion. You guys tell me what you think from watching the B-roll footage, because I'm sure it's going to showcase a ton of like particle effects and all of this stuff, but that would be one of my complaints. But like I said, other than that, animations are really, really good. The combat feels really, really good. And there's a definitive feeling of weight behind your every move that I really appreciate. Because you guys know I play Souls games, Monster Hunter, so whenever it comes to animations, I'm particularly demanding. And this game just felt really fun to play. It was really surprising because after seeing the gameplay footage, I was expecting to jump in there and be like, okay, this is going to feel a bit too floaty for my taste and I'm probably not going to like it that much. Not the case at all. I jumped in there and I was like, this feels great. The game actually has a really good polished feel that I would not have expected for a show floor demo. But what did I actually get to play? I didn't get to jump into the open world that we've talked about, that is showcased on the 2023 trailer. What we get is like this intro sequence where you're fighting off a group of bandits and there's some of your own people in there fighting alongside you, and then eventually something happens and you transition into this room that basically lets you pick up, go and select a couple of boss stages just to go and fight bosses, which is one of the ideal scenarios if you want to be testing out the combat system and all of that stuff. Of course, put a couple of boss fights, let us go ahead and fight them. So that's pretty much what I did. In the beginning, it was very confusing. I was very overwhelmed trying to figure out the different combos. And like I said, this is going to be one of those games that for you to really master the combo system, it's going to take quite a while, probably quite a few hours. You're going to have to get introduced to it at this, maybe a slower pace. And also, the button mapping that they had by default on the show floor was a little bit wonky, because pressing square to jump is not the first, the first thing that comes to mind, right? So usually your attacks would be like R1 light attack, R2 heavy attack, and that would use your your sword and your shield and all of that stuff. But then you can use like triangle and I think X to do kicks and punches, and then you can mix that up by jumping onto the person you are fighting and then dropping down and doing a bunch of kicks, or you can run up and do like a double kick. So there's a lot of different moves that you can do that really just let you, let loose. And there were also two types of weapons available, so I could either play sword and shield, or I could play a slightly larger sword. That would be, you'd just be using the sword and there would be no shield there. There's naturally a parry system, as we've come to expect from these games, so blocking at the very last second would give you a parry. That would sometimes give you an opening to punish the enemy. You can also do not really perfect dodge, but you can do like last second dodges. They will have invincibility frames, as we've become accustomed to in most of these games. But there's just something about the way that the combat plays that does feel quite unique, because, for instance, the game does not have a lock-on system. You're actually expected to move the camera and aim your character in the correct direction, which in a way initially feels a little bit disorienting, because you're like, oh man, I wish I could just lock on to this boss. But the reality is it gives you interesting camera angles to play from, and it doesn't really seem to take away from the overall vibe of the combat, which I liked, because we have grown to accustom whenever it comes to these third-person action games to just have this, the camera is always behind your character and you're always locked into the thing that you're fighting. Even though Monster Hunter doesn't really do that all that much, in Monster Hunter you kind of do this. Maybe that's why I liked it so much, because it gave me more of that vibe, like, oh, the monster's actually over here now and I'm off on the right side, and it feels different in a good way. But it will require a bit of, an adaptation period for you to get used to. There were a lot of times that I would end up swinging at thin air because I was still trying to figure out the different combos that you could do. But the clashes that you have with you and the boss just felt good, because you have like these big meaty shield slams that you can do onto the boss to stagger him and just like, let loose with crazy heavy attacks, as well as even charged attacks that I didn't do that much because I didn't even know how to do them. And then there's also an archery system where you can fire explosive arrows, like you can straight up dodge sideways and then slow down time, Neo style, and then pop off an explosive arrow against an enemy, which feels very satisfying. And there's also this special system that they have wherein your dude can do a palm strike, which is just like so out of nowhere, right? Because you have this character that has a sword and shield. He looks kind of like a character straight out of Game of Thrones. And then all of a sudden this dude's popping off wrestling moves and palm strikes. And the palm strike will stagger your enemy and give you the opening that you might want to do like a more charged attack or more heavy attacks and stuff like that. And it just felt surprisingly good to play. Also, there's all types of interactivity with the environment, so like you can pick up maybe crates that you find, and we've seen in the trailer like sometimes they'll show up explosive things and you can you attack those and they blow up and they'll blow you up alongside those. But you can pick up all kinds of items from the ground, throw them to the boss, or even use them in different ways, which I didn't even get to experiment that much. There's also a degree of verticality where you can like climb up different ledges and then jump off to do attacks. And when I was fighting the Stag Lord, he was just straight up sometimes throwing me up against walls and the walls will break down, and there's all types of realistic physics around that. It feels very visceral and it just feels really nice to play. I don't know how else to express that. But having said that, there is one complaint that I had that I wasn't particularly happy with, and that is that you pause the game to heal. And I feel like that kind of breaks the flow. I don't know if the developers are willing to change that at this point, considering that they've been into development of this title for about 5 years now, so it might just be something that's set in stone. But it's very much kind of like Skyrim, whenever I wanted to heal, you pause the game, and then you just start nomming down on food. It's like nom 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 nom, just eating a bunch of food to regen, which is always like, it kind of like, it breaks the immersion a little bit, at least to me. I prefer like, oh, can I just press down on D-pad? Maybe there's like a magical potion that I can drink or whatever, because I mean, some of these dudes are casting spells, their swords are on fire, there's already plenty of fantasy elements. Just give me a healing potion, it's fine. I don't need to be like, no, you have to eat food to heal, because I'm in the middle of fighting this Stag Lord boss, or when I was fighting the big Queen Crab or whatever, and it's like, oh, let me just pause real quick and nom down like 7 plates of food to, just give me like a magic potion that recharges once I rest at a bonfire or something like that. Personally, I prefer that, but I understand that different people will have different expectations to that kind of stuff. Maybe there will even be a crafting system for you to craft your own food. I don't know, because I didn't get to experience any of the actual open world stuff. This is very much just like a vertical slice with a couple of boss arenas and an initial encounter against multiple enemies for you to get a feel for what it is like to fight against multiple enemies as well. But having said that, the combat did still feel very much impactful. It feels good. It feels very satisfying whenever you're able to pull off one of those wrestling moves. There's also a system in place that allows you to glide in the air after you jump. So you can jump. If you jump from really high, you can glide. There's like this ghost form almost that appears on top of you. I'm sure there's like story reasons for that. And you can kind of like glide around. But on top of it, there's yet another system with the aerial stuff that's almost like a Spider-Man web slinging thing that you can kind of do. And that was actually weird. So what ended up happening was I played the game, and when I first got there, you start playing and there's this big encounter with a bunch of bandits like I've already mentioned. And then after that, you get sent to this room where you get to choose a boss fight. So I look at all the bosses that are there. There's like a little silhouette of what the boss looks like. I see a boss with a shield, which is the Stag Lord, and I was like, I want to fight that one. I want to see if I can go ahead and beat the guy with the shield. Fantastic fight. Absolutely loved it. Like me shield bashing him, him shield bashing me. Absolute blast. And after I killed him, I got to keep like his sword and his shield, which I then got to use on the next boss fight, which is pretty cool. But so I come off of that fight and I was like, okay, I'm looking around and I'm seeing that, oh, looks like most of these other bosses are also, humanoids, with the exception of like the Whitehorn boss, which is the one that I reacted to that gameplay. And I was like, well, I've already seen the gameplay of this one, so I want to see something different. And so I find this queen crab looking thing. And that was a mistake. I wish I had fought something else. But, I thought that my time with the game was going to be limited, but they were actually super chilled. They basically let me play for as long as I wanted because there wasn't that much people there to test out the game that day. So they were just like, oh, no, you can just keep playing. This thing's going to reset in a bit, but you can just keep going. I was like, oh, great. But if I had known that that was the case, I would not have gone for Queen Crab. So I jump into the Queen Crab. And one of the reps comes up behind me and is like, okay, so listen, this is the hardest boss that we have on this build. So here's how the mechanics work, because otherwise it's going to take you too long to kind of like figure out these mechanics, because you'll need to have played more of the game by the time you get to this point to understand how this works. And I was like, all right. So he explains to me the mechanics. You're supposed to like break down these rocks and then palm strike them and then eventually stab the crab with a sword. And, I do all of those things, and then they're like, okay, so now you got to go and you got to web sling around. I was like, wait, web slinging? Yeah, the game has web slinging. So straight up, the mechanic to defeat that boss is you're supposed to, like, break all these 3 things, and then you're supposed to web swing around the boss's head, and then that will put you at the top of the boss, at which point you're supposed to do an inverted palm strike thing mid-flight. Which turns out to be a really complicated move. I think they're probably going to be patching that boss to be maybe a little bit easier. And I'm not talking about easier in terms of, oh, they're going to simplify the mechanics. I'm talking like these mechanics need to be more responsive, because you have to like swing around at a very specific angle, and then you got to press a boost button, and then after you press the boost button, your character starts flipping all over the place, and then right as you're above this very specific point, the monster, you press the button again, and it does this inverted palm strike thing to break it. But it's really interesting to see. I eventually did see somebody that was able to pull that off. One of the people in the show, not like a random person like me playing the game. One of the actual people that were running the show. But there is going to be a lot of like movement abilities as well, from what I can tell, with the whole gliding thing, web swinging, and it feels like they just started looking at a bunch of different mechanics. And they were like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if our dude could do these crazy wrestling moves? Hell yeah, put those suckers in. Wouldn't it be cool if we could like do this crazy charge up sword attack and just bash somebody with sword and shield? Hell yeah, put that in. Shield bashes, yeah, put that in. How about we just get in and do like this monk type palm strike? Hells yeah. We should give our character a glide. A lot of open world games are doing that. Hell yeah. Hey dude, you guys played that Spider-Man game? Oh yeah, that web slinging thing? Really cool. Let's put that in too. Which I approve, by the way, because it does seem like it's a lot of fun and it feels very satisfying when you start like mastering all of these things and utilizing them at the same time, because it makes for a type of combat that has a decent degree of complexity to it, and at the same time feels very satisfying and visceral with the way that they were able to pull it off. So me personally, I was really excited after playing it, and I'm really looking forward to trying it out in 2025. Now, is it going to be a for sure recommendation? I don't know yet. All I can tell you is that the gameplay felt fantastic to play, but I'll need to see what their business model is going to be naturally, and I'll need to see just how much of an open world there is, because like I said, what I've played were very specific. Oh, here's a boss arena, here's another boss arena, to just check out the combat, and that was indeed impressive. But I'm looking forward to reporting more on this one. If you guys enjoyed this video, do hit up that like button. It helps me out a lot. And subscribe if you're looking for more of this or Monster Hunter Wilds or that type of content, because we're going to be doing a lot of that. But for now, that's going to be it. Thank you all very much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Stay strong, stay safe, peace out.